Hello, my name's Jeremy Barrell. I'm a tree consultant. I spend the bulk of my time advising people on how to manage their trees. For the last 35 years I've worked with trees. I started as a tree surgeon, climbing around in trees early on, and then when I got too old for that I started giving people advice. Today our consultancy is one of the biggest practices in the UK and most respected. We have built our reputation on providing reliable, truthful, balanced advice, and indeed we're not tree huggers, and certainly if a tree needs to come down, we're the first ones to accept that. But on the other side of the story, if a tree is worth keeping, then we'll work very hard to try and find creative and innovative ways to try and keep trees. Now I'm here today at the fantastic Kingston Lacy estate in the depths of Dorset, just outside Wimborne. And it's a magnificent estate, with the centrepiece being a mansion built in the 1660s that's now a Grade 1 listed building, and 8,000 acres of the estates roll out around it. So it's a great place to see, and the gardens associated with the main building are spectacular in their own right. And it's the gardens and the context of the setting that I want to talk to you about today, because one of the most important elements of that is a cedar tree, a cedar of Lebanon, that was planted by the Duke of Wellington in 1827. I know this tree very well because soon after the estate was bequeathed to the National Trust, the biggest bequeath they ever had, in 1981 by Henry Banks, the former owner, I worked on this tree. I spent 3 days up it, removing all the dead wood, reducing the branches to try and storm-proof it in the event of future storms, to try and make sure it could survive well into the long term. And that work proved to be very beneficial, because in the storms that we had in 1987 and 1990, the worst hurricanes for 200, 300 years, this tree and the others that we've worked on here remained intact and solid. And indeed, even as recently as 2 months ago in the St Jude's Day storm, which was the most severe storm we've had in this area for the last 30 years, with winds recorded close to 100 miles an hour, the tree again withstood those winds. Now, in terms of the actual tree, although I know it very well, I also, one of my other passions is heritage trees, and this tree is one of the most important heritage trees that we have in the country. Heritage value is based on an assessment of 3 characteristics, and I just want to set out quickly what those are so that you get a feel for how important this tree is. Visually, this tree was 20 metres tall, almost as wide, literally within 100 metres of the listed building, so important to the setting, and a spectacular tree to look at. Also, its trunk was 2.3 metres in diameter, so nearly 10 feet across. So it's the sort of tree that when you go and see it, you never forget it, you always remember it. So visually, this tree was extremely important, and also seen by the tens of thousands of visitors that come to the property every year and enjoy the gardens around the building. Another important element that contributes to heritage value is scientific value. This tree is over 180 years old. There are very few trees this old left now of the species, so it's one of the oldest. It's not the oldest, but it's one of the oldest trees that we have in the country of this species. And that's really important to conserve, to understand how it's able to last this long, what ecological characteristics evolve in trees of this age. It has a great potential to contribute to the scientific body of opinion, and for that reason this tree is also special for scientific reasons. But probably most important of all is the cultural value of this tree. It was planted by the Duke of Wellington, who in 1827, 1 year before he became Prime Minister of Great Britain for the first time. He was Prime Minister for two terms of office. And it was 12 years after he had won one of our most famous victories, the Battle of Waterloo against Napoleon. So this man was as close as you could get to royalty without actually being part of the royal family. And the fact that he planted this tree and was interested in planting something for the future, for future generations, is an immense cultural value and something that is so rare it's almost unique. And in fact, those three characteristics, that's why this tree was so unique, is that it has all three characteristics which make it certainly one of the top 10 heritage trees in the UK, and possibly one of the top 5. And there goes another one, I'm afraid. And that's why we're here today, because this tree was one of the top 5 trees in the UK, and a couple of days ago the National Trust cut it down. Now, there are always two sides to every story, and the National Trust have been very quick. In fact, the next day they posted a video on YouTube setting out their position, and you can see that by going to Google, putting in Kingston Lacy and also the Duke of Wellington Cedar, and you'll find their video in that listing. And it's worth a watch, and in that video they put their position. They say that they sought expert advice, that they did exhaustive technical investigations, that the tree was dying and it only had 5 or 6 years to live, that there was advanced decay in the trunk, and 95% of the trunk cross-section was ineffective, is what they were saying. And they also finally conclude by saying there was no option but to fell the tree. But as you become more experienced, one appreciates that there are always two sides to every story, and that's why I'm here today, to put the other side of that story. The National Trust were quite right and truthful in saying that they got a report from an independent expert, and this is it. It's a report from Symbiosis, who are some of the most respected tree consultants in the UK, and we'll look at some of the contents of that report in a second. But first of all, going to the point that the National Trust relied on, in that they're saying that the tree was dying. Well, when I looked at this tree 30 years ago, when I was climbing it in the 1980s, there was nothing wrong with it then. And I came and looked at this tree 3 months ago with a friend visiting from Australia, because I was so proud of this tree, and we looked at it then and it was in perfect health. So this idea that the tree was only going to last another 5 or 6 years is completely misleading. This tree has the potential to live decades, if not centuries, and there was no reason to suspect anything different. And in fact, the independent report that the National Trust commissioned says something very similar. The tree appeared to be in good overall physiological condition for a specimen of its size and age. So the dying justification doesn't seem to stand up to expert scrutiny. And let's move on to the decay. The Trust was saying that the trunk was so decayed that the tree was about to fall over effectively. Well, I've seen the cut cross-section of the trunk, and absolutely there is a central column of decay. But don't be mistaken, any expert will tell you that a central column of decay is normal in trees of this age. In fact, many old trees are hollow and it's no problem. The issue is whether the outer ring of wood is sound, and I'd say, looking at the cross-section, that 60-70% of that is sound, so there's no way this tree was going to fall down. But actually the issue really is whether the roots were decayed, and in all fairness, the National Trust expert did look at this, and I just want to read you his conclusions on that. I manually exposed the root collar in several locations to assess the integrity of the base of the remainder of the trunk. This failed to reveal any basal cavities or further areas of exposed decay. There was no decay that was discovered in the roots, and that means there was no chance of this tree blowing over, contrary to what we've been led to believe. And then finally, this suggestion that there was no option to fell. In fact, when you watch the video, it's very plausible. You think, oh, well, they've done the best thing. And in some instances, that's absolutely right, but I'm not so sure here. And really, in support of my position, I just read the conclusions and recommendations from that independent report. My investigations indicate that the tree is not as extensively decayed as the tomogram implies, and given its landscape value and historical significance, would suggest that removing the tree at this stage may be premature. Now that doesn't say to me that this tree is imminently dangerous and it needs to be removed immediately. And in fact that report goes on to say that a pruning option would be entirely feasible, and in fact, because I know the tree, I looked at it 2 months ago, and in my experience I place my reputation, and that's a considerable risk to do, on this tree could have been pruned and retained almost indefinitely with a much more sensitive management option that was carried out. So we have it here. I just want to make it clear that the National Trust haven't broken any laws. It's just felled one of the top 5 UK heritage trees. And many of you might say it's too late, so what's the point of me making this video? What's the point of doing anything? And you're absolutely right. I'm just one small man against a 4 million strong member organisation that's extremely powerful and very much has its own way. And an independent small voice isn't going to have any sway at all in their decision-making process. So I can't make a difference by myself, but maybe together we can send a message to the National Trust that they should be thinking a bit more carefully about these things. If you look at your video that you're watching now, you'll see that there are 2 icons at the bottom. There's the thumbs up icon, which says you like the video, and there's the thumbs down icon, which says you don't like the video. And obviously you make up your own mind. Watch the National Trust video, watch my video, and if you register a like or a dislike with either of those videos, then that is effectively a voting mechanism, a means for us as individuals to actually collectively have a voice and say, hang on a minute, something wasn't right here. We know nothing can be done about it now, but actually please be more careful in future when you make decisions about these trees. So that may well allow us to send a very powerful message to the National Trust to be a bit more careful and a bit more thoughtful in the future. And finally, for me, this is a very sad day, and I'm so sorry that I haven't managed to stop this tree being felled. But it's also sad for the whole country because we've lost one of our top 5 natural heritage assets. And for the National Trust, who cut down this tree against their own expert advice, they might want to ponder what their benefactor, their biggest benefactor, Henry Banks, would have thought when he bequeathed the estate in 1981 to a management decision that removed a tree that his ancestors had for 7 generations had all benefited from and was an integral part of the character of the ground and the setting of the listed building. It's certainly food for thought.